Ever wondered how far the US government would go to spy on its citizens? How far they'd go to eliminate a perceived threat? Or in this case, an inconvenience. Well, in 1956, first ever civilian director of the CIA, Allen Dulles, came up with the ingenious plan to put cameras in the sky, an inventive, if not invasive, attempt to more accurately track or stalk the average American citizen. It was a ploy to keep tabs on those suspected of communist activity, of course, but Dulles, ultimately, also had another plan up his sleeve. You see, the man and his team hated birds with a fiery passion. If Reddit existed back in the day, these guys would have made an entire community for it. But instead, using the wealth, influence, and government resources at their disposal, they decided to not only use their flying camera project to essentially violate the privacy of the people, but to also have robotic replacements for their inevitable plans of mass bird genocide. After all, these scum of the skies, as they called them, would shamelessly poop all over the pristine cars of the honest, hard-working American people, especially those of the CIA headquarters, and we can't have that. So through tireless top-secret campaigns, including an entirely manufactured war, we'll get into that, the government set out on its plans of forced avian extinction, eliminating most, if not all, of the flying feathered race. And they could have gotten away with it too. Well, they did, evidently. This is your first time hearing about this. But that nevertheless didn't stop the brave patriots, the bird truthers, if you will, from rallying against these genocidal atrocities, fighting for the justice of the helpless pigeons murdered decades past. This is the story of Birds Aren't Real, an activist movement founded in the early 70s to help shine light on the government's crimes and awaken the public to the truth surrounding America's bird drone population. Through relentless street rallies and campus events, it's a community that bravely aims to dismantle the anti-feathered lies of the mass media. And is also a piece of brilliantly crafted, intentional bullshit if I've ever seen one.
I consider myself to be an average American. I wake up in the morning, wash my car, and I have an avid disbelief in avian beings.
A key part of the propaganda effort by the government, they had people literally putting these in their front lawn. They had people putting up idols to the bird drone agenda in their front lawns without even knowing.
Birds are real! Birds are real!
We do not find this to be a humorous issue. This is serious. This is life or death.
I'm the leader of this. This is a decentralized movement.
It's dumb.
So if you haven't already guessed, Birds Aren't Real it's satire. Thankfully, it's not real. All that shit I said about the US government, not real. Don't come after me. Though I admit at first glance, I was ready to believe that this, in fact, was a genuine movement. You know, in an era where people are still apparently debating the shape of our planet or setting cell phone towers on fire in an effort to save us from a respiratory illness. I initially set my disbelief aside and was ready to accept that, sure, these people holding up "if it flies, it spies" signs, they exist. But it's exactly these sorts of increasingly commonplace, or at least increasingly spotlighted, acts of mass political lunacy that this movement aims to ultimately criticize. And yep, it turns out it's all just fortunately one big meme, just a beautiful piece of Gen Z performance art that stands for all things irony. But this approach to grappling with the crumbling hell world we struggle through daily was fascinating to me, and downright ingenious. So I thought, why not share this wonderful piece of the internet with you guys and dig into why it could unironically be a pretty beneficial movement despite the blatant ridiculousness of it all. And before I start, I know I'm sort of breaking this unspoken rule of playing along with the facade or charade of it all. And as fun as that would be, and there are videos like that on here, this isn't going to be that kind of video. It is a deep dive after all. And hey, the founder has already broken character for interviews, so it's not like I'm out to ruin this internet in-joke, I hope. But anyway, here's a quick rundown of this satirical conspiracy theory, the activism that its members have achieved over the past 5 or so years, and the impressive lore that surrounds it. Birds Aren't Real started off as an impromptu joke between college student Peter McIndoe and his friends in 2017. He was visiting Memphis in the wake of Donald Trump's presidency, and the political climate was, needless to say, pretty tense. McIndoe soon spotted a women's march aggravated by a disorderly group of counter-protesters, stating that the whole situation felt like chaos because the world felt like chaos. On a whim, he then grabbed a random poster off the wall, flipped it over, and wrote what would then become his iconic slogan, "Birds aren't real." McIndoe then waved around this unexpected, ridiculous statement amongst the counter-protesters, essentially making a mockery of the scene they were causing. He explained to the New York Times how his joke was simply meant to reflect the absurdity everyone was feeling at the time, as he walked around basically improvising the lore around his little conspiracy theory. This pretty much included most of what I mentioned in the intro. The government saw birds as an abomination, hatched a plan to replace them with surveillance drones, and attempted to cover up their actions since the 70s. Little did McIndoe know that he was actually being filmed that day, and the video eventually went viral, particularly among teenagers in the South. Since then, he decided to double down on this fake movement and began working with his friend and history buff Connor Gatos to build out an entire detailed history of Birds Aren't Real. They created fake documents and evidence, and even hired an actor to portray a CIA agent confessing to having worked on bird drone surveillance, a video that's amassed over 20 million views on TikTok.
Well, I saw some things that I really wish I hadn't seen.
Are you referring to bird drone surveillance?
Yeah.
So as to not leave any loose threads in their conspiracy, the history page on their official website addresses the common questions people might have regarding their theory. How did the government manage to kill hundreds of millions of birds? Well, by releasing hundreds of millions of robot birds that ejected specially formulated bird poison in the sky. And how would these drones recharge themselves, you may ask? By perching on power lines, of course. Well, what about the birds that fly out of the US and into neighboring countries? Well, they're programmed to monitor citizens who go on vacation. Or, traffic drugs from time to time. Where did they get the material to build these machines? By using war as an excuse to invade Vietnam, just to mine their country of bauxite ore, the main component used to create their robots. And how about the people who built these things? Why aren't they coming out in droves to condemn the government for their crimes? Well, you see. These workers were poached from local nightclubs, told they were going to a costume party in another town, were given fake acid, and escorted to a bunker where they were instructed to build a robot bird while listening to Pink Floyd non-stop. As a result, they all just thought they were tripping balls. Mastering the art of conspiratorial thinking, these two dudes managed to plug up every hole, or at least most, in their theory with some incredibly entertaining mental Olympics. Of course, every starting movement needs a leader and on-the-ground activist action. So McIndoe put on a cowboy hat and a character for the cameras and began hosting actual rallies and marches with his friends. These protests racked up hundreds of participants, which more recently included a demonstration at Twitter's San Francisco headquarters in which members demanded the company to change its disgusting logo, a heinous symbol in support of pro-bird social programming. The gatherings were basically like mass role-playing sessions in which everybody was in on the joke, creating their own plaques, signs, chants, and even booing flocks of birds that would fly by. With such a huge following, the movement would inevitably gain coverage on and confuse local media. And with McIndoe and his members putting on a pretty convincing act for the cameras, many, like me, assumed the movement was genuine, some even putting on their Reddit atheist caps to school these children on their ignorance. At one rally in Washington Square Park, considered their biggest one yet, members even bumped into a counter-protest group called Birds Are Real.
Birds are real!
Demanding McIndoe be investigated, claiming their movement was a psyop, and demanding their tax returns. Although it was rumored that these people were actually hired actors. McIndoe had eventually dropped out of college in 2018 to focus on this project, using the money he and Gatos made off of merch, approved by Mike Wazowski himself, by the way, to fund their living expenses, tours, and billboards. He also impressively never broke character on camera, that is, until a Vice interview this year, even pretending to get offended at a news reporter for asking whether the whole movement was actually just one big meme.
I mean, you don't really believe that that happened, correct? This is a satirical campaign to make the point that what? You're looking at me like, no, it's not satire. I really do believe this.
Honestly, it's kind of offensive.
Okay.
I don't think you would say that if I said birds are real.
And well, here we are. So you might be thinking, Well, why? Why a fake conspiracy theory movement? How is this supposed to help anything, especially with actual real problems these people could be protesting for? Which brings me to the ultimate goal of Birds Aren't Real. It's less a movement trying to push for active social change as it is just this form of catharsis for people. Or more specifically, a generation struggling through a world of fake news, disinformation, and as a result, a circus of a political and social landscape. It's more than just Gen Zers cosplaying conspiracy theorists for kicks. It functions as a mass coping mechanism. Gen Z's made their mark for plenty of things, but one of their most inarguably defining traits is their unique sense of humor, even in the face of dark times. One characterized by memes and often dipped in heavy doses and layers of irony.
Yeah, my mental health is not okay. Both my parents abandoned me last night. I'm fine. I'm kind of thriving, I guess.
Being the generation who were not only raised on the internet, but with social media and all its chaos being a staple of everyday life, they're constantly exposed to the online world and its endless barrage of information. And because of this, they're constantly exposed to all the doomer-inducing dumbasseries happening across the globe. By having to grapple with constant news of political turmoil, social injustice, and just general human stupidity, from people licking toilet bowls in the middle of a global pandemic to the growing consequences and inaction surrounding climate change, it's understandable for this generation to feel pretty weary, even nihilistic about things. But rather than just collectively sulk in despair and throw in the towel altogether, Gen Z users online have been known for choosing humor as their main coping strategy instead, confronting these issues head-on through ironic comedy and satire. And while it is a lighthearted way of dealing with pretty heavy topics, sarcastic posts like these, at least temporarily, provide an affirming release for one's frustrations. Grieving the impending heat death of our planet? Got you covered. Sick of greedy corporate culture? The memes run plenty. Tired of idiots during a global pandemic? That's practically a whole genre of its own. Content like this validates the collective disappointment we have in current systems, while at the same time offering a brief moment of respite, giving us that rare opportunity to not only acknowledge, but also just laugh at how ridiculous or irrational the behaviors surrounding awful situations often are. So it's no wonder that in an era where fake news and asinine conspiracy theories run buckwild on the internet, claiming the rationality of Facebook moms left and right, a group of Gen Z kids and other exasperated internet users would come together in a hilariously ironic public stunt to process the current state of the information age. Bird truthers, unite. As McIndoe puts it, we talk about it like an igloo, making a shelter out of the same thing that's posing the threat. Take the materials of what is around us, build something with them, be safe in there together, and laugh. There is fair discussion to be had on what the limits are in making fun of serious or complex issues like these. I mean, I guess with how silly a lot of real-life, ridiculous conspiracy theories already are, this subject matter is fair territory. But what about when dealing with arguably darker social topics with much less of a comical side to them? Is it acceptable to actually have school shooter humor as a type of comedy to help grapple with the ongoing gun violence in America? Or passing around memes in the midst of impending World War III? Personally, I believe people have their own ways of coping with the dismal realities of things. And if memes and ironic humor function as a helpful form of therapy for someone, then so be it. I also think most anything can be made into good comedy or jokes, depending on how you go about it. It is worth acknowledging, though, that scenarios or issues you're far removed from are much easier to make light of when you're not directly impacted by them. This plays a huge part in that fine line between using jokes as a way to simply communicate one's stress or uncertainty and just being tactless or ignorant. Where this line lies will differ on who you ask, though fortunately for a lot of the copium-filled memes out there, the subject matter typically deals with the creator themselves or their peers as a way of expressing or processing their anxieties around a situation. And for many, this actually helps alleviate them to some extent. For satire to be effective and entertaining, you've got to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And a lot of the dark humor shared by Gen Z just offers this comfortable space to validate each other's frustrations, fears, and shared dread over a given issue. On top of granting them a healthy dose of escapism, connecting with others in this way can also be relieving and helps them navigate through whatever messy emotions they may be feeling. And because a lot of the stuff happening in the world right now can feel like an unending mess of existential anxiety, confusion, and just all-around chaos, it's common for these jokes and memes to slip into the realm of absurdism, another element that's practically married to much of Gen Z's comedy, so much so that there are endless think pieces, studies, and video essays dissecting why their humor can get so f***ing weird.
First you take an oversaturated hallway, fill it with shadow demons, and then add some text like, me and the boys at 2 a.m. looking for beans!
The best way I could describe this connection is with more and more actual news articles sounding like they came straight from The Onion, and Twitter threads serving us new levels of insanity by the week, absurdist memes serve as this comedic manifestation of the world's collective descent into madness. Like all the ironic posts and jokes we saw earlier, it's yet another coping mechanism on the internet for reflecting on and processing the craziness around us. You can kind of view it as putting these chaotic experiences into art. Low-res, fever dreamy, deep-fried digital art. Like Helen Ehrlich writes in this article for Affinity magazine, when your world makes no sense and is entirely online, why should your comedy be any different? Back in 2020, I made a video dissecting this very type of humor, and admittedly I accidentally labeled it as millennial humor, as many in the comments have pointed out. While I mean plenty of millennials, particularly those who live online like I do, appreciate this sort of comedy, it is more so a thing created and popularized by Gen Z netizens, so thought I'd remedy that. I also mentioned in the video that it kind of functions as this generation's form of Dadaism, an art movement in the 1920s that reveled in the strange and bizarre, one that young artists used to reject, contrast, and critique the convention and reason of modern capitalist society. With Gen Z often characterized for their rebelliousness and defiance of rigid traditions, it makes sense many would turn to absurdist, Dada-like humor in their socio-political commentary. And all this kind of tracks with everything about the birds aren't real movement. The sheer ridiculousness and absurdity of it all, paired with its sharp irony, is exactly what its members use to criticize the ongoing issue of rampant misinformation. It's also worth noting that the entertainment factor of absurd memes like this project thrive on the notion of being in on the joke. So they bask in the sheer silliness of them because the weirder and more obscure they are to outsiders, the funnier they are to those in the know. All in all, being a bird truther primarily functions as entertaining, therapeutic copium, and in an era where we're more hyper-aware of the crumbling state of our world, stuff like this offers us a rare moment of comedic escapism. But given that wearing your enemy's skin in mockery kinda helps to defang them in some way, which is especially needed when you're parodying unhinged conspiratorial internet grifters who are typically seen as figures of intelligence or authority, could this approach also be used to possibly expose their ignorance and the irrationality of their actions? Not just to those already skeptical of internet conspiracy theories, that's a given, but the average person who may just be prone to believing these things, who may have dabbled in sharing an anti-vax Facebook post here and there, or who, may actively participate in these communities themselves. I mean, could birds aren't real be onto something kinda revolutionary here? Could their outlandish stunts finally help snap netizens out of their unfounded beliefs or clinging onto the first piece of fake news they see? Well, short and rather blunt answer, not anytime soon. But that isn't to say there isn't some, however small, potential for positive change. The likelihood of this movement/stunt being able to dissuade actual conspiracists is unlikely, at least according to Joseph Yazinski, political science professor at the University of Miami and researcher on conspiracy theories. As it is with a lot of people already neck deep in their beliefs, whatever they may be, those who already subscribe to certain conspiracy theories are only likely to see birds aren't real and say, yeah, that shit's ridiculous, but my theories are true. And then of course there's also people concerned that, yeah, it's all fun and games till someone actually genuinely believes in this shit and goes off to do something drastic. I mean, we've seen it before. That is the danger of pulling off this stunt in an era where actual off-the-wall conspiracies run rampant. I mean, it does say a lot that people who saw this movement at first glance readily believed that people do think this way. We're at a stage in society where stuff like this is barely parody anymore. Not to be a wet blanket, writes Ben Davis of ArtNet News, but I do think the likelihood that anti-bird ideology will turn the tide in the absence of some larger reversal in the decaying US institutions is zero, and the possibility that they will in some way add to the chaos is, in some real way, non-zero. He references 1975's Operation Mindf for comparison, a social experiment / activist satire that had similar intentions to Birds Aren't Real. The project was started by anarchists Carrie Thornley, who founded the satirical religion Discordianism, and Robert Anton Wilson, a fellow Discordian who worked in Playboy. Together, they planted fake stories of the Illuminati in the underground press and in the letters section of Playboy, attributing this secret society to all national calamities, assassinations, or conspiracies. The aim was to get people to start questioning the mainstream media, rather than blindly consuming whatever information was presented to them. David Bramwell, a longtime researcher on the Illuminati conspiracy, stated that its founders believed the world was becoming too authoritarian, too tight, too closed, too controlled. So the concept behind this was that if you give enough contrary points of view on a story, in theory, idealistically, the population at large start looking at these things and think, hang on a minute, it's an idealistic means of getting people to wake up to the suggested realities they inhabit. Idealistic for sure, because as we all know, it ironically stands as one of the most popular conspiracy theories to this day, particularly on the internet. Its intention of destabilizing one's faith in the government and mainstream news is also a tool, now ironically used by actual harmful conspiracy theorists. Thornley and Wilson wanted to shift the public from simply following the dominant cultural narrative and instead have them think for themselves. But sadly, we now live in a world where the former has not only stayed the norm, but we also have people mindlessly following off-the-wall 4chan conspiracies. So, despite all its good intentions, is Birds Aren't Real headed down the same path, bound to form actual global communities of anti-bird activists? Personally, I don't think so, or at least it's very unlikely. For one thing, while Thornley and Wilson's project focused on disseminating multiple conspiracy theories, McIndoe's movement sticks to one, and an incredibly debunkable one at that. Seriously, anyone who actually falls for this is just a YouTube agricultural video or egg hatching time-lapse away from discrediting its beliefs altogether. Plus, by increasingly ramping up the absurdity of this one message, it becomes more obviously parodic in nature. It helps that there are very noticeable references to real conspiracy theories or the popular buzzwords often shared about in these online communities. Birds Aren't Real signs or t-shirts are often seen with the slogan, "Wake up, sheeple," and even have their very own hashtag labeled Poultrygate, a nod to the infamous hashtag Pizzagate conspiracy. And though they borrow their jargon from them from time to time, the founders are still consciously careful in walking that fine line between entertaining parody and actual conspiratorial rhetoric.
Is there any danger of adding to the noise?
Always. We want to make sure we're not using language that actually harmful and hateful conspiracy theories use to target people.
Because it's a lot more satirical in its approach, it may actually be a lot more impactful in its message, rather than simply coming off as a mere prank or means for social disruption. By also highlighting the traits that it shares with other outlandish yet widely popular conspiracy theories, they may be better able to shine light on these theories' lack of logic or critical thinking. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean they'll change minds, but they may be able to, at the very least, challenge people's biases and how these unfounded beliefs are so easily able to convince new followers. Hopefully they'll be more effective, at least, than Operation Mindf. We've seen this before in plenty of mainstream entertainment, where comedic satire or blatant parody is used to unmask common ignorant views or challenge dominant cultural perspectives. South Park and Borat are two works that come to mind that successfully pull this off, reeling you in with its hilarious comedy before serving up some pretty sharp, witty social commentary. And that's the benefit to using humor as a tool for social critique. It's a disarming way of delivering an important message, and could effectively engage people in conversations they otherwise wouldn't take interest in. On top of that, mocking certain behaviors or situations and inviting people to laugh at them could also be a pretty strong form of condemnation. Again, this probably won't change the minds of those being mocked, but it may at least help outsiders understand why people find these actions questionable and possibly deter them from engaging in these behaviors themselves. In his book, Personality and Sense of Humor, Professor Aviner Ziv explains this approach best, pretty much summing up the political message of Birds Aren't Real. The satirist is not content with the world as it is, or more precisely, he is not content with certain things in it, which to him seem black. In his attack, he blackens them yet further, in the hope that after blushing with due shame, they will turn white. In short, while the movement does encroach into other conspiratorial spaces online, the more you get to know about them, the more obvious their intentions become, making it hard to actually genuinely fall for their beliefs. Plus, it is worth noting that after years of playing his persona dead straight for the cameras, Peter McIndoe has finally broken character for various news outlets and video interviews, revealing that his whole stunt is, in all actuality, satire. He states to the New York Times, "Dealing in the world of misinformation for the past few years, we've been really conscious of the line we walk. The idea is meant to be so preposterous, but we make sure nothing we're saying is too realistic. That's a consideration with coming out of character." In fact, he considers it the next step in evolving the movement to something that could more actively push a positive message and bring forth greater change. As far as future plans go, McIndoe hopes to eventually collaborate with big-name content creators and even independent news media. Based on the stuff I've read and watched, I'm not sure where exactly the project is going to be taken from here, but with all the shenanigans they've achieved so far, I'm definitely intrigued to see what they've got in store. One thing's for certain though, these guys are the trolls we never knew we needed. In an era where misinformation has become the norm, where in America in particular, nearly 40% of the population have accidentally shared fake news and over 60% are now left confused about basic facts, where people are turning to horse dewormer instead of vaccines amidst a global pandemic, where people still believe the earth is flat or shaped like a fucking donut, or cling to the theory of there being a satanic cabal of cannibals out to get your children, and Donald Trump. A movement like Birds Aren't Real that holds up a mirror to the insanity overtaking American and global discourse gives us all, at least for a brief moment in time, that much needed comedic relief.
It's taking this concept of misinformation and almost building a little safe space to come together within it and laugh at it rather than be scared by it, and accept the lunacy of it all and be a bird truther for a moment in time when everything's so crazy.
Wake up, America! Wake up! God!
So that about sums up my little coverage / deep dive into this hilarious meme of an organization and its potential effects on how we consume media and information, particularly online. I only stumbled upon these guys this year and initially did dismiss their stunts as just, well, there they go again, just another day, another conspiracy theory, and only found out a couple months ago that, yeah, no, it's all a troll, and a meticulously planned out one at that, so kudos to Peter McIndoe and co. That rhymes. Anyway, if you want to look into these guys yourself, check out their official website at birdsaren'treal.com, where you'll find merch reviewed by Obama and Richard Nixon themselves. Of course, I'd love to hear what your guys' thoughts are on this interesting piece of internet performance art, or if any of you have attended their rallies yourselves. I'm jealous, it looks like fun. If you find these sorts of video essays on pop culture or online phenomena interesting, feel free to subscribe and turn on notifications to keep up to date on my latest stuff. It will be a while until my next upload. I am working on the script, it's already in progress, but I will be going for a 2-month holiday in the Philippines, so expect it after then. In the meantime, you can find me active on my Instagram stories if that's something that interests you. And with that, I hope you guys all have a happy new year. If it flies, it spies. And I'll catch you guys in the next one.